a committee from April 2021 to interrogate the matter. Its report indicates that there is no universally accepted definition of academic freedom. For example, how different is academic freedom from the freedom of speech? Surely, academic freedom encompasses certain principles and values. Perhaps our panelists will enlighten our minds on what academic freedom is, with reference to students, professors within the academy, the gown, and with reference to society, the state, town. How should academic freedom define this town-gown relationship? How are the procedures, the processes within the academy valued by its own members? How free is a state-funded university? And what is the African university? Two traditions of the university exist in Africa: the ancient indigenous university and the modern university. Ancient universities include Al-Qarawiyyin in Fez, Morocco, founded in 857 AD by a woman, Fatima al-Fahiri. Al-Azhar University of Cairo, founded in 972 AD. And then you talk about Sankore in Timbuktu, who thrived between the 13th and the 16th centuries AD. The oldest university in Europe is the University of Bologna in Italy, founded in 1080. That and many which followed were Catholic institutions that laid the foundation of the modern university in Europe. It is this modern European university project that informs the second university tradition in Africa, wrought through the colonial enterprise in the 19th century, and continues to define what we perceive to be the African university on the continent today, almost obliterating the ancient tradition. As we know, the University of Ghana, Legon, for example, was established in the Oxbridge tradition. So what is African about it? What is African about universities on the continent in outlook, teaching, research, and its dissemination? Are they not European in character? Finally, is the university a public good? Does the African university serve the common good of society? Or is it an institution steeped in a free market economy, characterized by social cleavage? What is academic freedom then in such spaces? Is academic freedom a right, a privilege? If so, what are the responsibilities? I'm looking forward to listening to our panelists to enlighten my mind on some of these issues. And in that light, I would like to introduce them briefly. Professor Admako Ampofo will be the first. She will speak on the corporate university and university autonomy. She's a professor of African and Gender Studies at the Institute of African Studies here at the University of Ghana. She is an accomplished scholar, an activist. Her work is informed by her faith and commitment to justice. At the heart of her scholarship are questions of identity, and power within families, political and religious spaces, and the knowledge industry. Her areas of interest include African knowledge systems, higher education, race and identity politics, gender relations, masculinities, popular culture, etc. Professor Dumaku Ampofo's bio is very long. She's an accomplished scholar. Permit me to stop here and ask her at the appropriate time to speak. The second who will join us virtually, Dr. Caesar Atiu. He will speak on coloniality in the structures of higher education, a case study of the University of Ghana. He's a philosopher and health ethicist from Ghana who is currently the ethics lead for the MSc in International Health and Tropical Medicine at the University of Oxford. He's a senior lecturer of the Department of Philosophy and Classics here at the University of Ghana. He too is accomplished in his area. I'm not going to read the entire bio. He will join us virtually when the time comes. He will be the second speaker. And then Ms. Mami Okyerefo, a young African feminist perspective on academic freedom in the classroom. I like that. That's what she's going to talk about. Mami Okyerefo is an African feminist, creative, and activist based in Accra. She is deeply invested in building feminist community and is a co-organizer of the Young Feminist Collective, a group of incredible young women looking to deepen their personal politics and tap into the larger feminist movement space. As a master's student at the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies, she's constantly looking for ways to marry her creative, academic, and professional pursuits with her personal politics. Welcome. And the final speaker tonight, Dr. Samuel Bernard. He will introduce his documentary on academic freedom. He's a senior lecturer at the Department of Theatre Arts, holds a PhD in cinema and new technologies, and a master's degree in international cinema, both from the University of Bedfordshire in England. So he will introduce this work he has done on academic freedom, and that will be presented after the third speaker. I will then invite them to have an interaction before we close the first session. Each of them will have up to 15 minutes. So, Professor Dumaku Ampofour, welcome to the podium. Or you can sit. Thank you.
I'll move up there. Is that on? Okay, I'll sit down when we're having our conversation. Although looking at my height, I'm not sure whether this is such a good idea. Good evening, everyone. Gratitude to Dr. Chikamba, who I cannot see, colleagues at the Institute of African Studies, of course, our chair, moderator, Professor Okyerefo, and colleagues who are online. Thank you all for joining us this evening. So, just to preface this by indicating my location, the University of Ghana has been my professional home for the last 33 years. I entered young and naive in 1989 with a bachelor's in architecture, a master of science in development planning in hand, and very little idea about what a university actually meant and how it operated. I mean, I had been in one, but beyond that, beyond getting my degrees, what did it really mean? And issues of academic freedom were not something that I really thought about. For the first 4 years or so, I enjoyed this state of oblivion and truly engaged my research in a reasonably unfettered way. That changed in the 90s when structural adjustment came, and with it came the effects on higher education of that. Of course, that was not a result only of structural adjustment. This had been happening over the years. My objective today, in the time that I have, is to put on the table the ecosystem and architecture of higher education today and how the contemporary university sits in that space and could sit in that space to serve our unique needs. Some of the issues: knowledge production, student admissions, teaching and research, research funding, publications, university governance, appointments and promotions, and the general how do we do business in higher education. Of course, I'll not be able to touch on all of these, but I hope that today, from my colleagues and in the ensuing weeks, we will confront these in collaboration and conversation with the rest of you in greater detail. In the last several years, we at the Institute of African Studies have had multiple occasions to reference Nkrumah's words at the formal opening of our institute to remind us of our goals. Nkrumah was a visionary but also a pragmatist. He and his contemporaries in the intelligentsia were conscious of the fact that the university in the post-independent state remained a Eurocentric relic. And yet, within those constraints, they believed in African higher education and the role, a pivotal role that it could play in transforming our societies. Nkrumah envisioned, and I quote, a many-sided Institute of African Studies which should fertilize the university and through the university, the nation, unquote. Over the years, we have, with varying degrees of success, been a part of that project, and this seminar series is, I think, part of that journey. Let me quote further from Nkrumah, as I believe the questions he asked us then retain relevance regarding our universities. So where it says Institute of African Studies, think also universities in Ghana. 1, what sort of Institute of African Studies does Ghana want and need to have? In what ways can Ghana make its own specific contribution to the advancement of knowledge about the peoples and cultures of Africa through past history and through contemporary problems? 3, are we sure that we have established here the best possible relationship between teachers and students? 4, for what kind of service are we preparing students of this institute and of our universities? 5, to what extent are our universities identified with the aspirations of Ghana and Africa? I've tried to summarize the many questions he asks us. I think that our students and Ghanaians must judge us, and we must reassess ourselves. Professor Okyerefo did a nice job of giving us a bit of a history of ancient universities, which I had intended to also share with you. So let me just give you one additional fun fact. When Fatima bint Mohammed Al-Ferreya Al-Qurashiyya established the world's first university in 895 in the contemporary era in Fez, now Morocco, she and her sister had inherited a great deal of wealth from their father, and she used her share to establish this university. I share this to show us that those of us who have money, certainly we can use our money in important ways to develop higher education, and I'll say a little bit more about that at the end. So what kind of animal is the university? The current model is a product of Europe. States needed higher education to train their ruling, priestly, military, and other service elites, and developed a model of higher education and higher learning that combined teaching, research, and publication, initially on Christian religious foundations, and it was characterized by its corporate autonomy and academic freedom. As our moderator has said to us, we are probably not going to land at a definitive definition of academic freedom. I think it's nebulous, like wealth or money, but it's a legal and moral concept, and we know when we don't have it, and we know when it's taken away from us. But in some, we could agree that it's about the liberty to teach, pursue, and discuss knowledge and to learn, including to teach and research and publish and learn on unpopular subjects without restriction or interference or fear of reprisal from school officials, from our colleagues, or from public officials, aka the government. The early universities were corporations of students and masters, initially all men, and they eventually received their charters from popes, emperors, and kings, obviously also all men. We've heard about the earliest university in Europe. The trajectory then began to change, and universities became communities of scholars for universal knowledge production, not just for the elite. Central also was the notion to develop citizens with ideals for development of their societies. And to cite Nkrumah at the establishment of the Institute of African Studies, and I quote, he says, "Indeed, education consists not only in the sum of what a man knows, or the skill with which he can put this to his own advantage. In my view, a man's education must also be measured in terms of the soundness of his judgment of people and things, and his power to understand and appreciate the needs of his fellow men, and to be of service to them. The educated man should be so sensitive to the conditions around him that he makes it his chief endeavor to improve those conditions for the good of all." Today, our universities are secularized, except for a number of private institutions. Our curricula are evolved to include the several disciplines that we know today. The public universities obviously have been state-financed. Our universities are organized bureaucracies, and of course, women have been admitted into higher education. From the late 20th century came the massification of higher education. So not just for the elite, but for quote-unquote the people. Then came larger and larger numbers. And I'm just going to summarize some of the ingredients today and some of the changing effects. It will be difficult to nail all of these because it's a very differentiated terrain, but I'll paint the corporate model in some broad strokes. For those who want to read further, I encourage you to read the works of Professors Akila Pasoya, Adai Mensah from our own University of Ghana, both of them former vice-chancellors, Professor Tandika Nkandewera, Professor Paul Zeleza, Codestria, a lot of the work produced by Codestria and the Association of African University, to name but a few. So when we're looking at issues of commodification, we have moved in higher education from a system of public good to corporate and private good and notions of cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness has meant that funding has had to be looked at, or let me not say has had to, has been looked at in ways of supply and demand, and what kind of student and what kind of research we are looking at. According to, and this has meant increasing numbers. According to UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report, 157,626 students enrolled in higher education in Ghana in 2014, more than twice the number that we had in 2005. So in less than 10 years, we had doubled the number of students that we had enrolled in higher education. 20% of Ghana's wealthiest students attend university, while less than 1% of Ghana's poorest students attend university to date. And this is also from the UNESCO report. Ghana's uptick parallels a worldwide increase. Between 2000 and 2014, the number of students enrolled in higher education increased from 100 million to 297 million worldwide. And this increase is going to continue. In a State of the Nation address to Parliament on the 9th of March in 2021, President Akufo-Addo said, and I quote, 64 years after independence, we still do not have the critical mass of tertiary education graduates that is required for our socio-economic transformation. We must therefore introduce measures to increase consciously the proportion of our population with relevant tertiary education to accelerate the transformation of our country, unquote. He outlined a target of increased enrollment from the current, that is in 2021, 18% to 40% by 2030. He concluded, we expect record numbers of enrollment over the next 4 years. I'm not going to analyze that statement. It's for your consumption. Meanwhile, there's dwindling state support. Expenditure on tertiary education as a percentage of government expenditure in Ghana was 18.6% as of 2018, forming also at the time 3.4% of GDP. Its highest value over the past 43 years was 27% in 1971, followed by almost 26% in 2010. Lowest value was 1.82% in 1981. Education was free until the 1980s, when the World Bank introduced structural adjustment to us. And the cost of education was shifted from parents, the state government to parents, and shifted from government expenditure shifted from primary and secondary shifted from higher education to focus on primary and secondary education. We can have a whole debate about what that did and the kinds of questions that one posed at the time. Introduced was what was called the AFUF, so Academic Facilities User Fee, which I think is more of a, It's a way of asking for fees without calling it school fees. Although we have the GET Fund, which was established by law in 2000, unlike, say, the Pell Grant that you have in the US or BAföG, which you have in Germany, which are direct grants to students and sometimes include loans, the GET Fund is not money that is given directly to students. This is money that goes to higher education institutions. They have to determine how to look at it. A third issue, so I talked about funding generally and the dwindling state support. A third issue is how we look at students. In a corporate model, students are now seen as customers and consumers and are to be prepared for the job market. And yet, in a liberal education, not to be confused with a liberal arts education, in a liberal education, we're also interested, or should be interested, used to be interested in education that also inculcated a sense of values, ethics, and civic education, and a broad education that was not focused only on the market. When we teach Introduction to African Studies here, I'm always surprised that, so this is at level 200, I'm always surprised at the depth of knowledge about issues pertaining to Africa that our level 200 students seem to reflect. I recently had to speak to a student from South Africa who wanted to do a master's here at the University of Ghana. And I took a visit to many of our departments. And the majority of the courses were really based on Eurocentric theories and models. And eventually the student said, okay, then she's going to come and do her master's at the Institute of African Studies because she wants it to have a focus on Africa. So if we are training students for our context, then the kinds of courses that we teach are also relevant. In this corporate model of the student, a lot of emphasis is also on who can pay. So we find that with graduate education, increasingly it is students who can come under the umbrella of research funding. Recently, a colleague and myself were talking to one of our students who has funding under a particular grant from a particular European country that will remain nameless. And all the students who were receiving that grant were expected to use a particular theoretical model, which really did not fit the questions that the student was seeking to ask. With payment, students also come with a certain sense of entitlement about their rights and what they think that they can and they cannot do. And while knowledge should not disenfranchise anyone on the basis of sex, religion, gender, or sexual orientation, race, and so forth, there should be room for dissent. And so what we are finding in many jurisdictions in the global north is that unpopular and subjects that are perceived to be politically incorrect are supposed to not be allowed, but we should be able to have conversations about the unpopular. Okay, I'm told I have 0 minutes left. So I would have talked about educators and the role that we play, how our reliance on research grants stymies our efforts. I would have talked about compensation for vice chancellors and what some presidents and vice chancellors earn, but how it translates into garnering research for their universities. In Ghana, our vice chancellors have these opportunities, particularly very elegant cars, but we do not necessarily see that this translates into funding for higher education. And let me just highlight areas that we can return to in the conversation about what we might do and what the state might do. We need to look at improvement of quality of education, funding both from the state, and there's a lot that we can do within our own institutions, looking at our programs and the curriculum and how they are fit for purpose, pastoral care, attracting and retaining graduate students, and national and regional cooperation. Hopefully in the conversation I'll have time to go into more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You will surely have time. We will have time for conversation. Caesar Achu.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll share my slides and get started. Are my slides visible now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I agree with all that has been said before about the importance of this series of seminars that the Institute of African Studies has organized. I will not go over with the thank yous and naming people who have contributed to this. We may have time for that at the end. But I'll try and move straight to a topic that I would like to share some thoughts on this evening. And anyway, just as I was listening to the previous presentations talking about the origins of the university as we know it today, I just thought I would share with you a couple of thoughts. One is the fact that just think of what happens whenever we have our congregations for students to receive their degrees. And think of the colors that we use. And I'm sure Professor Mike Okyerefo, who belongs to the Catholic clergy, can tell you that, it's very hierarchical. And, as it gets higher, as you get higher, the color gets more red. And then finally, there is this saying about, there's this saying by G.K. Chesterton, which I'm sure Professor Ampufor would comment on as well. It's the fact that, Chesterton says when men want to do things that appear to be serious, they dress like women. So we wear gowns, judges wear wigs, and yet at the same time, we are not always willing to relinquish power equally between the genders. But anyway, my topic is about coloniality and higher education. But before actually looking at the case of the University of Ghana, the first thing I want to do is to try and, zoom in on the concept of coloniality. We are all aware of colonialism. Ghana was a colony like many other African countries. And we often think colonialism is wrong, and rightly so. But when we ask about the specific moral evil of colonialism, what is it that makes colonialism wrong? I don't think it is merely the issues linked to, let's say, slavery, pilfering of resources, discrimination against people. These are evils in themselves, but they are evils that can actually be practiced without necessarily colonizing other people. So we need to look at the specific evil or the specific moral wrong of coloniality. And what I would say is this: the specific moral wrong of coloniality is that it is a systemic subtraction, one, subtraction, two, substitution of the self-determining agency of a collective of peoples and individuals. So this comes even from the original root of the word colonus, where in the Roman times, a colonus was basically a place which the Romans occupied and made sure that that place was working to serve Rome. Therefore, when you colonize a people, you subtract their agency And we subtract that using various, that is done using various structures. And not only do you subtract their agency of self-determination, but you substitute it with another form of agency so that whatever they do, actually, at the end of the day, it is the periphery or the lower ranks that are actually serving the interests of the higher rank. And that way you introduce a system called coloniality. And that form of coloniality actually remains even after what we now call, the independence era. And we sometimes talk about the post-colonial era. Sometimes we decide to put the hyphen between post and colonial to say that it is something that is in the past, or we keep them together, post-colonial, to say we are now living in a post-colonial world. But this actual reality in which we live is deeply entrenched in coloniality. And I can go on about these concepts. Coloniality operates using three structural concepts that are important. One is epistemicide, and this is linked to the work that we actually do in the university. Just to ask a question to everybody here, most of the times we as Ghanaians, when somebody says, what is your first language? We talk of our mother tongue, right? You could be an Akan, an Ewe, in my case, a Bulsa. But the truth of the matter is that the academic work that I do, I cannot even express it in Buli, which is my language. So there's been a subtraction of, a sort of epistemicide of those knowledge systems. And as soon as I step in school, a different agency is being introduced into me in a different world vision. And then there is genocide and ecocide. We can come back to those terms later on, because I think 15 minutes is too short to be able to expound on each of these concepts. So I'll move on to the next slide. Let's see. So if we have understood coloniality as a change of agency, so that the agency is working for the center, let us look at the university. Much has been said about the university, the initial African universities, but that tradition hasn't been continued, and the universities that we actually live and work in today come from the European tradition, because they were introduced by the Europeans. And this European tradition, of course, is ecclesial in its origin. And therefore, I decided to go and look at a document that was issued by the late John Paul II, Ex Corde Ecclesia, which says, the university is natus ex corde ecclesia. And we try to define the university as an academic community in which sorry, my slide is just moved, right. Academic community, which in a rigorous and scientific and critical fashion assists in the protection and advancement of human dignity and of a cultural heritage through research. And I want to underline the fact that the first word is research. We are here to generate knowledge, teaching, and various services offered to the local, national, and international communities. And he continues, the university, therefore, in this vision, says it possesses that institutional autonomy necessary to perform its functions and effectively guarantees its members academic freedom, so long as the rights of the individual and the person of the individual person and of the community are preserved within the confines of the truth and the common good. I could almost stop on each of these words. So we're talking of institutional autonomy, that is some capacity. Autonomy comes from Greek, autonomos, self-legislation, to have the tools to be able to decide how to perform its functions. And secondly, guarantees its members academic freedom. And who are the members of a university? The members of the university are the teaching staff, the research staff, the administrative staff, the students, and even their guardians. This is the community. And and each member has to have the freedom to be able to pursue the ends of the institution, as long as this pursuit is within the confines of the truth and the common good. So, having said this, and I have to move very quickly, let us look at the University of Ghana and coloniality. most of us are familiar with the history of the creation of the University of Ghana and similar universities that were created during the colonial era. And the finality of these universities was basically to generate a qualified group of natives to be able to ensure the functioning of the colonial government. And this raises certain questions about how we perceive the university. So, I mean, university graduates were almost, as it were, promoted among their communities to be some form of elite that collaborated with the colonial system in order to ensure that this system was perpetuated. Therefore, I put in here what Frantz Fanon writes in Black Skin, White Mask. Was my freedom not given to me then in order to create a world of the you? So we could actually even today say that, well, at the base of that, those structures of coloniality that underlie the existence of universities like the University of Ghana have not yet been unmasked and have not yet actually been substituted. And what I want to say this evening, and I may give some examples that might be uncomfortable to some people, is that the University of Ghana is still steeped in coloniality. And as long as we are steeped in coloniality, it means that the agency, the activity, the actions of the people within the University of Ghana will always be subject to some other end, which is external or subservient to other people, because that is how coloniality works. And let me just give some examples quickly, and later on in the discussion, I'm sure we can get back to this. Our university is characterized with a very strong sense of hierarchism. I mean, I'm currently speaking to you from the University of Oxford. I meet with professors, lecturers, administrators. We all call each other by the first name. In Ghana, we are interested in ensuring that everybody knows our titles and responds and calls us by our titles. There might be a pushback saying, well, that is our tradition. We like to respect people and their elders and that kind of thing. But let us be careful also about always appealing to tradition, because we've discarded certain traditions. Why are we keeping some? And what is the value for a tradition? You know, tradere, to be carried on, it has to represent a value. But if it becomes a form of oppression, then we need to take a second look at it. Or another example about the hierarchism, and this comes from an interview that Miriam Makeba gave once. Miriam Makeba was saying that, in most parts of the world, people don't exist until the white man comes and say, yes, you exist. So therefore, we talk about things like the discovery of America. And the Indians that were there didn't think they were covered, yet somebody says they've been discovered. Transform this into a sort of coloniality structure, and I'll explain what I'm trying to say here. Just open the webpage of the University of Ghana and look at the news. In the news section, a community made up of more than 40,000 people, up to 70 or 80% of all the news articles that are reported about the activities of the Vice Chancellor and the management of the university, as if the other people do not even do anything. And for their activity to be legitimized, it has to be the Vice Chancellor or the Pro-Vice Chancellor or the Provost who has to come there and visit them, and then their activities will be recognized. You see, these are the structures of coloniality, and sometimes we are not even aware of them, but we are perpetuating them unconsciously. There is, coloniality generates a form of clientelism. I can talk about this clientelism whereby, power is used to buy people.
1 minute.
Pardon? How many more minutes?
1 minute.
1 minute. So, clientelism. What is your right becomes a favor. Authoritarianism. People make mistakes and they simply do not feel the need to justify administrative impunity. Elitism, we're always campaigning, and sometimes even in this search for academic freedom, we could actually be campaigning for positions of elitism. And I'll give a controversial example. We, members of UTAG, go to negotiate for better conditions, and we agree with government to find a way to receive money that the other unions cannot ask for, because we are a privileged class. So we invent online teaching and we take the money. Why are we not fighting for all the other unions? And anyway, pathways to decolonization. I know my 1 minute is almost finishing, so let me just, we need a hegemonic decolonization. There's something from Morgan Freeman saying, you know, freedom is important, but freedom requires responsibility. And freedom means that we should actually assume it and take the risk that that it involves. And let us remember, nobody is going to give us freedom. It is ours and we have to take it. We cannot wait for somebody to come and give it to us. That is against the meaning of freedom. And freedom is freedom from and freedom to do what we are here for. Anyway, I'll end here. I could say much more, but let us end with Bob Marley, who says, "None but ourselves can free our minds and have no fears," from the Redemption song. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caesar. Thank you. Mami, Ajwa. Powerful. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about a young African feminist approach to democracy in the classroom. So as young feminists, a lot of the things that we do are about envisioning and re-envisioning the spaces that we inhabit. And so when I approached this topic, I began to imagine a physical space, which was really about how the room was constructed, where people would sit. There weren't very many desks, weren't very many strict tables and chairs. It was a really round table setup where people could feel comfortable, a room that felt warm. I thought about the mood and the lighting. And I think the reason that that came to me first was because in my active curation of a feminist space, that's what I believe gives us the right and the space and the inclination to have the open discussions, the free expression, and the active engagement that we do in our young feminist spaces, is creating spaces which are warm and which are open. And so thinking about how to parallel that in the academic space, I had to look at what I thought we would need in place to achieve the same sort of feeling and the same sort of mood outside of a movement space. And because of my positionality as a young Black African Ghanaian woman, and I guess because of my personal politics, the place I looked first was the Charter of Principles for African Feminists. And so I've adapted many of the things that the Charter invokes and says to how I think I would envision my ideal or an ideal academic space, or an ideal space for academic conversation, aka a classroom. So for me, the central thing, and for many feminists, the central question, no matter where we are of our analytical lens, is how we deconstruct power and how we reevaluate power dynamics and power relations in the spaces that we do inhabit. And so within the classroom, the first axis of power that I think I had to go to was the student-teacher dynamic. And that came to questions of agency, of the dynamic between students and teachers, where we imagine teachers or lecturers as holders of all knowledge and students as holders of none. How we think of teachers as active engagers in a classroom space and some students as passive, who are just downloading the information that they're given. And there's a certain inherent power imbalance there. It's another reason why I feel kind of uncomfortable with platforms and microphones and all the get up, because it does have that inherent imbalance of somebody up somewhere who knows things and somebody down somewhere who doesn't know much. I think it also comes to questions of who is an authority and what they are an authority on or of. I don't for 1 second believe that any of the students, even in my class or wherever I have been, have half the knowledge that the lecturers we interact with constantly have. What I do think is that as students, we are experts in our own lives, that we are experts on our own perspectives, on the ways in which our generation informs how we view things. And so I think within the classroom space, if we move from downloading things to a co-creation of knowledge between students and teachers, what we have is all of the vast experience that our lecturers bring applied to the very unique perspectives that we have, and seeing how that creates, for me, magic in classroom spaces. I don't know that there are very many lecturers at the university here who could speak to the release of a new Beyonce album in the way that many of the students that I've been with and sat in classrooms with could. But with the knowledge that they have and with their perspectives informing our outlooks, what happens is we create academic inquiry that exists within our own personal spaces and that moves outside of just the classroom into places that we inhabit wherever we go. I thought of reimagining mentorship dynamics, and there's something really special in the Charter where they not only enshrine the fact that people should be mentored, but they talk specifically about what that mentorship could look like. And so they call the mentorship non-matronizing, which I thought was really interesting, because there's a way in which sometimes we don't see each other. And so students look at their mentors, or students look at the people that they look up to as genies, right? Who can just do anything they want for them, grant them their wishes, give them advancement. But also that teachers and lecturers or people who are in positions of power sometimes look at students not as active engagers, but as people who can continue on their own thinking and their own sort of academic pursuits in another generation. And so finding a middle space where people's ideas and thoughts and interests can be validated and can be guided without people necessarily relying on others, aka the lecturers, to sort of grant them everything that they can and give them the spaces that they don't already have access to. I also think we have to situate individuals within even broader configurations of power. And so even though we're talking about the classroom space, people don't stop being people when they enter a classroom space. You inhabit all of the multiple intersections that you have inhabited outside the classroom space within it. And so there are ways in which your identities, where you sit, the power you do or do not have access to, and your privilege will come into the classroom space with you. The diverse backgrounds people have also do that. The different roles people play within their families, within society, I think is very, very important here as well. And there's something really beautiful about how feminists articulate whole lives and whole people and acknowledge whole people even when they're existing in spaces to avoid instrumentalizing human beings and reducing them down. And so to always be mindful of who people are even when they're engaging within the classroom space. Moving on from that point, I think something that's really central as well is who is voiced and who is unvoiced but not voiceless within the classroom space. How much space do people take up? I don't know how many people have been in a class where there are 3 people who carry on the entire conversation and everybody else kind of watches them like they're not part of the conversation, and why that happens. And if we watch who feels like they have the right to take up space, who talks the most, who sinks to the back, who considers themselves valuable within academic spaces, even among peers, but also in terms of who we bring into the classroom based on who we're reading. Who are we reading? Are we just reading people who exist within the canon? I think I'm blessed to be in a bubble at the Institute of African Studies where decoloniality is something that's central, that I can't actually escape. But I think there are a lot of disciplines within the university community where decoloniality is something that is never invoked. And so I think, who are we talking about? Who are we reading? And also, why are we reading them? Because there are ways in which I think African literature was my home and kind of is my home, so I'll go back there. If we're engaging the dominant Eurocentric canon of literature, how are we reading it? What questions are we asking of the texts? How do we engage? Do we simply take what they've done and take that as the standard and read it and move on, or do we ask the right questions as we read those texts? I think also for me as a feminist, there's something about safe spaces that I keep coming back to. And safe in terms of people feeling like they have the right to be vulnerable as academics where they are, to actively engage with their full humanity and know that their dignity won't be questioned, that their full humanity isn't going to be questioned. And I think we have to have that in balance with challenges and contestation, right? In this learning, in this unlearning, in this evolution, in this growth, you have to be safe enough in this space to have your views challenged, but also that we're challenging views and we're challenging ideas and concepts and not people and not identity and not people's dignity and people's right to exist as who they are wherever they are. As central values for me, it's solidarity and highlighting interconnectedness across difference within the classroom space, holding the space for multiple views and multiple lived experiences, because everybody navigates the same spaces very differently based on a whole number of factors that I've already mentioned before. And then challenging ideas and concepts and beliefs is critical to what we do as academics, but also what we do as people just navigating the world. And so to end this, I think we always have to assume a posture of constant self-critique for everyone at all levels. How am I showing up in the spaces I show up in? Did I do my reading? if you're a student, and if you didn't do your reading, why not? Do you come in ready to engage actively? Do we all agree that in this academic pursuit that we're all dedicated, that we're all engaging, we're all passionate? And I know it's very strange to use the word love in an academic sense, but do we love this thing that we're doing when we say that we're learning? Do we love this thing that we're doing when we say that we're engaging in academic inquiry? Do we love the things that we say we are dedicating our lives to? So yes, I'll end on that note about constant self-reflection. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Samuel, you have 2 minutes to speak to that documentary, and we watch it.
Okay. So I don't think I need a podium. Right, so we've heard quite a bit about academic freedom, and I'd want to believe that this evening's program, in a way, ties into something that happened nearly 2 years ago when UTAG was in a serious tussle with government with regards to the Public University Bill. So at the time, a committee was set up to sort of come up with some media campaign strategies to see how best we could actually neutralize government's attempt to shove down the Public University Bill down our throats. So I did a short infomercial which was used as part of the campaign strategy. And when we were making some positive, gaining some positive grounds, I decided that I probably should make a much longer version of that infomercial. So the documentary that we're going to watch is titled #Drop the PUB, which was produced in 2020. So some of the cast are here with us. We would get a bit of education, some background to the PUB and why UTAG fought it with all its might. Let's bear in mind that we have actually just won some temporary victory because PUB is still lingering, just as many of the policies that got a bit of public chastisement. So I think that the documentary is still relevant, so that it keeps going and it keeps us thinking all the time that we have to keep this fight going. So it's about 24 minutes. Have fun and enjoy.
We no go grill, not today, not tomorrow. We no go grill, not today, not tomorrow. We no go grill, not today, not tomorrow. We no go grill, not today, not tomorrow.
The background to the bill, as far as those of us who are members of UTAG are concerned, is that at some point last year, we became aware that there was a bill that sought to, in our understanding, harmonize the organization of public universities in Ghana. We were made to understand from the readings that introduced the bill that this bill seeks to bring us into a space where if there are issues of irregularity in administration and management, this could be done better.
The basis for the bill are twofold. One is the fact that there is some alleged financial mispropriety and mismanagement in the universities. And secondly, the university has veered off its principal mandates, and therefore there is a need for governmental control. Now, these two claims or allegations are unfounded because if you look at the realities on the ground, corruption is not a major issue in universities compared to what we have in the public institutions. Secondly, the universities cannot on its own veer off its mandate, or it cannot start any course without resource to the National Accreditation Board, and most importantly, the National Council on Tertiary Education. So for these reasons, the government claims are unfounded.
Trying to rationalize how the public universities will operate. I think the basic thrust of the bill and the rationale for it, and it is incontestable. There are public universities in Ghana, each one of them having almost different charters and running differently. We've now rationalized it so that we have a more simplified and more lucid and coherent management and administration of the school. But there are one or two aspects of the bills that have generated controversy, and I'm very, very keen that those matters should be looked at again. Okay. Like, for instance, the composition of the councils, of the governing councils of the university. Some valid criticisms have been made about the initial proposals the government made, and I think it's only right that we pause and have a look at it again. And that is the way it should be. And that is the legislative process that is done by any responsible people. The government comes out with an initial position and draft, and then as a result of public comment and criticism, people are able to point to some important loopholes, or you respond to it. Yeah. So I want to do that very much of the public universities, but have a look again at the composition of the governing councils.
Okay.
The government is only using this to cover up the real intent of the bill. And with your permission, I think let me just take it up. If we go to Article 45, Article 47, it reads, the minister may give directives on matters of policy through the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission to a public university, and the public university shall comply. Samson, this is the key motivation of the bill.
Recently on Oma FM, the president conceded that there were some issues with the bill, especially the constitution of the councils, which would have given the majority membership and a resultant quorum to government, meaning that virtually the government will be running the universities. He considered there was a problem. It had to go back to the drawing board. But he also said that the bill was uncontestable. We beg respectfully to differ.
We challenge the law on three main grounds. It frowns against at least 4 principal provisions in the Constitution. It is also unnecessary in the sense that the government is being given a lot of powers in this law, which will create uncalled for bureaucracy in the running of the universities. So we can talk about the University Council itself. The council in most institutions is made up of about 21 people. The new bill is filtering the numbers down to 13. And of this number, the majority are to be appointed by the president or nominated by the president. This is in violation of the existing rules, as especially if you go to the Constitution itself, Article 1953. Then we are talking about the fact that the chairman of council is also to be appointed by the president. That also violates the Constitution. The president is appointing the chancellors. Is also, at least according to the spirit of the law, it violates the Constitution, because the chancellor is not supposed to be appointed as chancellor. So if he ends up appointing the chancellors, they are going to be proxies for the government, and therefore it will introduce unnecessary executive interference in the running of the universities. We are also talking about the fact that the government representatives can form a quorum and make decisions for the running of the universities. There was also the situation where the president can say that a university council is dissolved on grounds of an emergency, which emergency is not defined, and for an interim council to be appointed, and for the government to run the universities through this interim council. The composition of the interim council is not defined. So there are a number of challenges and question marks with regard to these issues that are in in the new composition that the bill is proposing. We also have a situation where the Minister of Education can make directives, and these directives will override any decision that is made by even the University Council. So that is extremely intrusive in the running of universities.
In 2010, I was the chairman of council of Takoradi Polytechnic, now Takoradi Technical University. A deputy minister calls me as chairman and directs that I should ask the then rector to proceed on leave. I asked why, because the Act and the statutes clearly indicates that the chairman is a chairman of council, and the council is the highest decision-making body. And so I drew his attention to this. Eventually, I was nearly removed, but for the authorities then going strictly by the provisions of the Act. And so that decision couldn't go through.
The whole notion of academic freedom means that in an institution of higher learning, you should be able to provide courses that you think are important for students, and you should be able to do that freely. Of course, each course goes through a rigorous process of design. It goes through an assessment process at the departmental level, at the college level, at the academic board level, and the Council for Tertiary Education will at some point also come and assess our programs and decide to give us a check that we can go ahead.
In 2011, another deputy minister of education, by radio announcement, decided that a program that had been approved by the academic board of the University of Cape Coast, granted accreditation by the National Accreditation Board, by radio announcement, that deputy minister ordered that program should be removed from University of Cape Coast, specifically from the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration to GIMPA, by radio announcement. There too, we had to make reference to the Act provisions, and because of that, that couldn't be implemented.
There are other areas that what I decide to research on, I should have the freedom to do so. I should have the freedom to collaborate with a colleague anywhere in Ghana, on the continent, and the rest of the world. The kinds of programs that we design should be left to universities to decide, looking at what the relevance is to the country, and of course people's individual interests. Now, by ceding the approval of many of these to a Minister of Education, what prevents us from being protected from the idiosyncrasies of a particular individual? So let us say, for the sake of argument, that I want to compare the level of sexual harassment, if you like, among ministers within the NDC compared to within the NPP. I'm trying to be controversial to make my point. And the government in power is one of them. And as my research is unfolding, it suggests that male ministers under that government which is in office have more cases of sexual harassment against them. What prevents the Minister of Education from saying, Prof. Sadumako and Prof, you should stop her work. Okay, they are not happy with where the findings are going. It may look like a ridiculous example, but we should make laws that protect us from the most ridiculous, from the potentially most extreme, from the potentially dangerous. We don't know. People have not known how good or bad a law is in its extreme case until it has been tested. We are foreseeing the potential for abuse, and that is why we are worried.
Currently, there is someone, the Institute of Educational Planning and Administration has been upgraded to a Category 2 status by UNESCO. And there's someone who has been actively involved in this. That person was to be granted a position at that place, the Vice Chancellor couldn't in effect that because the Minister of Education is alleged to have made a pronouncement against the appointment of that particular person. So you see, if this bill goes through and Article 47 as it is goes through, we stand to experience a situation where in future, even the appointment of a laborer in the university has to be determined by the Minister of Education.
And it also raises the issue of causing more problem than it's supposed to solve. Because if you are going to the minister, for example, it is going to slow down the process. There are situations where you have to, even when you have to buy chairs in the lecture theater, you have to go to the minister. If you have a research grant that you are applying for, it has to go to the minister. And you know that research grants have timelines attached to them. And we already know scholarship secretariats, the problems they give to students studying abroad, the delays in processing their funds and so on. So it is going to create so many challenges for the running of the universities. And so for these and many other reasons, which if you want to take each item one by one, we will not be able to exhaust the list today. We call for the bill not to see the light of day. In other words, the bill should be shelved.
This bill is a non-starter. The existing provisions we have in our Act provide for accountability and all those things that the proposed bill, harmonized bill, wants to do. And so let us strengthen the Act, the operationalization of the existing Act.
All right.
And then encourage governing councils to ensure that operational challenges within each university are corrected.
All right.
Government must intervene, but government must not interfere.
All right.
This bill seeks to make government interfere in university governance.
All right.
It must not be allowed.
It looks like academic freedom is being trampled on and taken away under this government. All of you in the educational sector are afraid to speak because you're afraid you'll be sacked. And so you see a lot of things going wrong. People have been gagged. Headmasters complain quietly to us. Heads of institutions complain quietly to us, but nobody can speak out. This is a democracy. And I think it's a very unfortunate development. And all the kinds of things that are happening. A public universities bill to govern all universities. Who says all universities are the same? Universities have different missions and they specialize differently and they're put up for different purposes. The University of Mines and Technology in Takwa does not have the same mission as the University of Health and Allied Sciences in Ho. So why should they have a common public universities bill, that creates a blanket governance for all of them? It's not acceptable. And so we advise the government to drop that bill.
Academic freedom is an important component of university education in the sense that it gives the university community that is covered by the university itself, academics and students, the freedom to pursue scientific inquiry, to generate knowledge and to disseminate the knowledge without undue governmental interference. And it is considered a functional necessity in that it is not necessarily a right for the academic to enjoy in itself, but it's a right that is to be enjoyed by the academic and the students for the greater good of the society, because the knowledge that is produced is to promote the well-being of the society. It is for this reason that governments are supposed to protect this freedom and to ensure that it is respected on the campuses as well as even off campus. So in this context, we see a situation where over the years, universities have fought to protect this freedom. Going back from the time of Nkrumah up to where we are now, the current 1992 Constitution recognizes academic freedom directly in the Constitution. That is the first time we've had such a dispensation, recognition in the constitutional dispensation of the country. So if you go to Article 21(1)(b), academic freedom is recognized as such. then there are equally other provisions in the Constitution that seeks to protect academic freedom. If you go to Article 68(1)(b) of the Constitution, it bars the President from holding the office of Chancellor. And it wasn't just put there, it was because previously presidents and heads of state had occupied that position and used that as an avenue to infringe on the university space. So there is also another provision, Article 1953, which says that the president can appoint leaders in other public institutions. But when it comes to the university, it is the university that has the rights and the power to appoint chairpersons for the university council, and also to regulate or to determine the self-governance of the university itself, and therefore the university governing council, being a very prominent part of university education, is supposed to be controlled by the university itself.
What do we mean by academic freedom? I'll ask this question because for the first time in the history and annals of this country, we have a document that defines what academic freedom is. Hitherto, I could not understand what we mean by academic freedom. Now, is there any part of the bill that is put forward to Parliament that suggests that a university lecturer cannot go ahead with any research and the University Council may have a problem with or without? Is there any part of the bill that shows that a lecturer, or if you like, a staff of the university, cannot do what he or she has been doing before the introduction of this bill? If there is none like that, then issues of academic freedom is one that is exaggerated, in my opinion, because academic freedom does not necessarily mean that the management or the leadership of the various universities could do whatever they want at every point in time.
Are we saying that by harmonizing the Act, commitment to the mandates and suppression of peering will cease? Are we saying that harmonization of the Act will prevent university of cakeouts, for instance, from running a medical program? Are we saying that it will prevent University of Ghana from running education programs? The issue of hearing and all those things, they are just using it to clone the real intent. And this is where I think stakeholders' concern has come up. Because if you kill university autonomy, if you kill academic freedom in universities, you destroy quality policy making in the nation.
Those of us at UTAG Legon want to assure Ghanaians that this struggle is not about a hidden agenda that we have. We are really concerned about what this public universities bill will potentially do to higher education, what it might do for our prospective students in curtailing what they might study. We are concerned about what lecturers can teach, what research they can do across the country. We are concerned about our image as a nation where democracy has been hailed. We are not partisan. In fact, we belong to different parties. Some of us do not belong to any party at all. In elections, we vote differently. And our only agenda is to insulate and continue to protect higher education from the potential interference of the executive arm of government in this country. And we think that the current procedures, the current statutes, the current national laws that we have are more than adequate to rein in any university that might be doing something that government perceives we're not doing properly, or something that we should do that we are not doing adequately. There is enough legislation, there are enough procedures, there are enough statutes to enable that to happen. If those who have the responsibility to call us to order will do what they are supposed to do. So we want to say again, borrowing that phrase, that if it ain't broke, let's not try to fix it.
Because if the bill is passed, it will overhaul and completely dismantle the years of struggle that the university has fought to protect academic freedom. And when academic freedom is compromised, it will certainly compromise democracy in the country as a whole, because the university is a space that champions democracy and human rights. And if this law comes into place, it's going to create a culture of silence on universities. It is going to prevent university lecturers from criticizing government, which is our right to do. And therefore, it is going to create a gap on the ability of universities to be free and to criticize and to churn out knowledge that will promote the well-being of the society. So for the greater good of the country, we're saying that people should come on board to support UTAG. Parents, especially those with children in the universities, students, should rally behind us, because ultimately it's going to affect students. Principally, the bill will affect the university itself and lecturers, but students are also affected. So students are ultimately also going to be affected. And so it's going to affect the entire nation, and therefore we need everybody on board to be able to fight this fight.
Right. Thank you very much for indulging me for about 24 minutes. Right. So, Public University Bill. I'm going to continue from where Prof. Kwejo Apieje Etuya left off. My reflection on the documentary is going to be focused on the relationship that we have with our students. And if the technical team is ready, you can bring up my slides. I would do a very quick take on that. Technical team. 5 minutes. Yes, Prof, I would work within the 5 minutes. There is technical team, if you are ready, there's an image which I think is very important for me to make my point. So maybe whilst we wait for that image to come up, it's a picture I took in Rome, the University of Rome 3. And this is an image from their media school, which has the inscription, "Supervised Independence." And you have a line going through supervised, you have a line going through independence. And Professor Odro from UCC spoke about interference and intrusion and all that. How do we relate to our students? How do we perceive our students? My co-presenter earlier on touched on the space in which we work, where we find students. Oftentimes, you would hear students telling you all sorts of things. And just last night, I had a graduate student in my office, and sometimes we just shy away from the reality. We know what students face in terms of their place in the learning environment. We are talking a lot about academic freedom, which oftentimes is skewed towards faculty, academics, and maybe the administrators. What about the students who are key constituents in this whole picture? Do we accord them the same rights and freedom to self-express, to be part of the knowledge creation meal? Or are we assuming the position of the master know-it-all and therefore trying to push down their throats that which we think is appropriate for them. So we have the situation where, just like in the clip, former president was saying that people are refusing to talk because they feel they would be sacked. And if I were to rework what he said in the context of our relationship with our students, it would be, we are afraid to talk because we are afraid we will not graduate. Okay? You hear this often, that students have very genuine concerns about how we relate to them, how we treat them, even how we supervise their work. But because of the fear of not graduating on schedule, they just have to take it. They get somehow gagged, and they are wailing in that state of suppression, if you like. So what are we doing as the academy? What are we doing as faculty to replicate that which we are fighting for all the time, the academic freedom? It does not only stop at the doors of faculty and institutional heads. Our main and major constituent, the students, how do we relate? How do we give them the opportunity to self-express, to be part? Do we just wish away their dreams, their suggestions, even in the lecture theater? Some people would be very quiet, and when you meet them outside, they are very vocal. You ask them why? Because they feel a bit intimidated. They feel that their views, their ideas are not valued. My co-presenter was talking. They are experts in their own right. What is our teachability index? My teachability index, your teachability index is our willingness to accept change and our willingness to learn. And because we are in that circle that we are constantly learning, if we don't apply ourselves to wanting to learn more, we will not be in a position to actually share and co-create with our students. Thank you. I hope we'll talk more when...
Thank you very much. I'm smiling because he has heeded the time. Right, we're running late, and the conversation will become boring when people are tired and dragging their feet. I'd like to prevent that and make it more interesting. I was going to give us a break for 5 minutes, but given the circumstances and in consultation with some of you here, some people think that we should just, move on a little bit and close early, right? Good. That's in the spirit of academic freedom. The place has been set up also, this place has been set up in that same spirit. What I intend to do now is to ask them a question each, so they can come into some conversation on this critical issue. And then, you are the most important people here. You can make any interjection, raise your hand, make a point, make the discussion interesting. Mami, I'm so interested in your perspective. I'm very happy that you are here, giving us the voice of students. We cannot be here without students. In other words, if there were no students, there would be no university, right? So, this point about teachers uploading information and students downloading information is a very critical one you brought about. And that should be stemmed in a university where conversation should generate knowledge. I'd like you to give us practical examples, because some of your teachers are here, of how that can change in this space, right? And talking about which, Caesar, are you online, Caesar? You have made some critical points about the kind of decoloniality you would like to see at the University of Ghana. I'd like you to speak a bit more about that in very practical ways. You've raised many questions regarding areas in which hierarchies exist, elitism exists, etc. What would you like to see in a very free independent space where we can all generate ideas. That's what universities is about. Generate ideas in such spaces. And talking about generating ideas, have we succeeded from the beginning, Akosia, in furthering that goal of making the university a real African university? I'm still interested in that subject. The dream of Nkrumah, which sort of established your institute, and how this university will continue to be relevant to our society. What suggestions do you have for us who are engaged in this? Academic freedom, the public universities bill, we have fought it with all vigor. Well, if that's our right, how about our responsibilities toward those, the taxpayers, who fund the academy?
Thank you very much for the question. I think I don't pretend to know what it's like to teach, especially at the undergraduate level where the classes are huge, because I don't know how you facilitate like an engaged conversation with 200 or 300 people within 3 hours or 2 hours. Between 4 or 5 people, it's enough of a task, let alone that number. But I know I've had the privilege of being taught in classrooms by Prof as well, where the model hasn't been to be downloaded information to. But that has required a certain amount of trust in how engaged students are willing to be. So in our classroom for African Studies and gender, particularly gender and culture, what we had was a model where we took turns. We had different weeks where we would be responsible for taking the texts for the week, analyzing them, breaking them down, and then presenting to our classmates, following that with a conversation. But that's a very small class of people who are actively engaged and who are willing to do the work. So I think when it comes to freedom, it's freedom as a right, but also as a responsibility to step up and to engage and to do the part that you have to do in order to make it, so that our lecturers can say, I trust that if I tell a student, you're in charge for the week, I want to know what your perspective is on X, Y, Z, and then present that to your classmates and have a conversation, that will happen and it will be of value to everyone in the room.
Very interesting. Caesar.
Yep. Well, there could be many things said here, but I'm just going to touch on 3 points. The first thing we need to do is to look at the structure that actually holds our university in place. We've been writing in the past 10 years that we want the University of Ghana to become a research-intensive university, world-class university. They are all there written. Yet at the same time, and I think Akosia mentioned this as well, if we look at the way we actually reward people in the University of Ghana, we reward people through assuming administrative positions. And I remember writing this on the UTAC page, and I didn't have any feedback on that. If incentives and rewards are given for administration, do we really want to become an administration-centered university, or we want to become a research-centered university? And how much are we creating space so that there can be innovation, reward for academic effort in research and also in teaching? But then you said, what does it mean to be free? It means, to have academic freedom and to operate to operate within academic freedom. Let's go back to what we said before. The university is supposed to be an autonomous community. It means a self-governing institution. This means that the whole community of the university needs to participate in the governance. And that community, as we've outlined before, is made up of the students, is made up of their guardians, is made up of the lecturers and the administrative staff. So actually, in deciding how we can best serve our community, we need to listen to all the members of the community. This means that we need to move away from a sort of like top to bottom, top down sort of concept of running our universities. And in a community that is self-governing, one of the important things that is required is trust among the members of the community. And I think the last speaker just mentioned trust between students and lecturers and that. Now, there are certain conditions to generate trust. To have trust, you have to have trustworthy persons. And a trustworthy person is a person who distinguishes themselves with 3 characteristics. The first is that a trustworthy person is competent in doing what they have to do. So, we need to hold each other accountable. Administrators need to be held accountable, lecturers need to be held accountable, and students need to be held accountable equally, to show that we are all competent in doing what we have to do to make this university a really autonomous, self-governing body. And apart from, second, from competence is reliability. Reliability means we say what we do. When we say something, we do it, and we can be counted on. So, if we commit to giving our students certain level of teaching, we have to live up to it. Just as the same way, if the students commit to studying for a degree, they need also to be held accountable and be reliable to produce the amount of work that is required to be able to acquire, to be able to achieve this degree. And the same goes for the administrative staff. If something is written down and it is a right, I mean, look, the University of Ghana is a situation, I mean, we're in a situation whereby even when the student wants their transcript, which is their right to have, the bureaucratic process is such that it seems almost as if we're doing them a favor. No. We all have to hold each other accountable. So, competent, reliable, and then above all, to make ourselves vulnerable. And to make ourselves vulnerable means we should be open to criticism.
Thank you.
We have, at the end of every semester or during every semester, lecturer-student evaluation. These should actually become more engaging so that we can actually even sit down and listen to students as they criticize the way we teach them. And the same thing goes for the administration, and even for the senior administrators. We have to be able to criticize them, all within the spirit of making the whole place a better place. So, to make us, to become, a place where freedom reigns, we all have to realize that we are all citizens of this self-governing body. And we all have different roles and responsibilities. And it is not a question of hierarchies. We're only occupying different service roles. And everybody in their service role needs to be trustworthy. And to be trustworthy, in that role, they have to be competent, they have to be reliable, and they have to be accountable and vulnerable. That is it.
And when you have such competent people in places, we can generate ideas, coming back to your whole point of co-creating knowledge, right? Which is not going to be a top-down kind of giving information to others. Would you like to weigh in on this regarding the African university aspect?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mame, for when you talked about your vision and your dream. And I think if we can think of a university as a place where people can envision and dream, then we are starting to do something. The massification has not helped us. Where Cesar ended, I want to say, as Ghanaians, it depends on all of us. I often go into institutions and places and I'm suggesting or commenting on something that sounds impractical, idealistic. Then they will ask me, but are you not a Ghanaian? In other words, why are you being so unrealistic to think that something can change? Look, it depends on all of us. Otherwise, we continue to be a nation of potential, never arriving and doing talk shops. So I want to speak to us. We've talked about what we need to do for our students. In the corporatization of the university, the we, the faculty, we are service providers. The staff, we are service providers. So if you have a particular program, a center of excellence, and so forth, you are thinking of the service that you are providing to meet a need. You are thinking of rankings. You are thinking of yourself in comparison to other universities. It's not necessarily about what individuals are bringing to the plate. And what I'm going to say next, please, it shouldn't be misunderstood that I am privileging that we should iconize or idealize or idolize anyone. But I think that in every discipline, there are people who have surfaced. We can think of the Jechis and the William Abrahams and the Techua Menus and the, so many of our colleagues, the Professor Bedus in medicine. We can think of the Letitia Obings ad infinitum. People who have made very significant contributions to disciplines. And if I'm coming as a student into a university, I should be interested not just in studying sociology or mathematics or chemistry or whatever, but also learning from particular people who have made very significant contributions. Now, if we are doing our programs and our courses just to meet a market need, then it doesn't matter who goes and who comes. It doesn't matter who you employ and who you promote. If you go back to the model of rewarding people with administrative positions, then you are really not thinking about the very particular and unique contributions that particular individuals can make. Coming back to what we also can do, for ourselves, of course, government, I don't think that there's any nation in the world that has prospered without government, without the state supporting higher education and research. It is not possible. We will always be going cup in hand, and I was going to list a number of institutions who provide the major funding for research at the University of Ghana, but not to embarrass us, I'm not going to do that. If we can't fund the things that we want to do ourselves, other people are always going to drive the agenda. So the state has to do that. But we also have to focus on the little money that we get. How do we want to use that to increase this freedom that we are talking about? Are we going to be interested in Akan verbs, or we are only going to be interested in malaria research, right? And all of these are very, both of these are pertinent. I remember when I was serving on the University of Ghana Council, at one point, Mr. Okyerefo was chair. Mr. Okyerefo had studied law, but before that he had studied philosophy. And he said to us that he does not think that he would have been an astute businessman or had an understanding of the world without his study of philosophy. We talk about a general curriculum, but there are certain subjects. Of course, it starts from the lower level. History, I cannot see how one can develop as a nation without a study of history. And there's no reason why we cannot find a way of introducing history into our general curriculum. Cesare was talking about the colonial library, the colonial archive that we continue to study. We need to do a severe assessment of our curricula and programs, not just for the market, but for a content that speaks to us as African people, as Ghanaian people. How does the literature, and somebody refers to the literature as the ancestors, are our ancestors present in what we are teaching to our students? Or are we going to look and we'll just see old dead white men and their perspectives? And we can do this kind of an assessment. It will take time, but we can do that kind of assessment and begin to think about how programs and curricula are not just fit for the market, but are also fit for the kinds of issues that are important to us. And perhaps the last point that I will make is, or two, we do a lot of teaching, and we burden our younger faculty with these lower level undergraduate classes and the majority of the courses. And yet I dare say our graduate students, also our undergraduates, but our graduate students and our young lecturers are probably most creative. Me, I'm recycling things that I've done at this point. Yeah, there's some new knowledge. I may be listening to Beyonce, I'll fit it in somewhere, I've taken a snippet of it. The creativity is coming from the younger ones. And if we do not give them the space to think, to read, they are just moving. COVID has come. Where has been the space for people to sit down and spend some months looking at the pile of books put beside their bed and actually reading them? And the younger ones need that. And this is something that we as an institution, or we don't need government, we don't need external funding to fix that kind of thing. And final comment about the students. Students have responsibilities to us and to themselves. We have responsibilities to them. In order for that system to go back to a more humane model, we need to reintroduce pastoral care of some kind. I think that we have left the young people too much to their own devices. The world right now has become a very difficult place mentally in which to operate. And they do need a certain level of care and responsiveness from us who have the experience. Why should we hear that there has been gang rape in a university in this country, and the response is that young women should be careful how they enter male halls? This is my own alma mater, KNUST. As far as I know, all the halls are co-educational anyway. So where would the young women be going? And how about the laboratories? How about the libraries? Should they now not go if they are young men there? And what has happened to our engagement with the young people that this can be happening on a university campus? So if we are engaging more cross-generationally, having those spaces for conversations, unfortunately, many young people don't have it in their homes. We can be a space where we are providing that kind of mentoring at a personal level. I don't think students wake up and decide, how terrible can I be today? But something has not connected, and the pastoral care that we should be providing, I think that we have reneged on that.
Thank you very much. That's a broken tutorial system. And even the ancient universities had students studying at the feet of their masters as disciples, a kind of collegiality that took place, which is broken. And now within our own modern university, which was set up here in Legon, the pastoral kind of care you're talking about, which we had in the tutorial system, I dare say, is broken. But coming back to you, the rights, responsibilities regarding such a bill.
Yes. I think we all are conversant with the adage that he who pays the piper calls the tune. Right, he who pays the piper would call the tune, but somebody would have to sing the tune. So, yes, governments fund universities, and in the case of UG, we have government paying parts of our bills, and we generating some to meet our own needs. But then, does it give that blanket check for government to want to dictate every single thing that has got to be done here? Just like Prof. Ampopo said in the documentary, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Professor Odro in the documentary gave us two instances in 2010 and 2011, where by invoking the acts that govern the universities and people who saw reason to it, what they wanted to do did not happen. So it means that if we really let the systems work, if we implement the laws, the acts, the regulations that are existent, we should be doing that which is proper in the eye of government, and there will not be need for any intrusive sort of regulations or bills that will come our way. But then, if we come back to our context, our own corridors, how complacent are we in some of the things that happen here? Do we give people a slap on the wrist when there is a need? If some faculty, some administrator does something wrong, is it just okay to set up committees and the committees will come up with their recommendations and then the recommendations will just end up where they were given? Or we see to it that the recommendations are implemented to the letter so that it would serve as a deterrent so that we all fall in line. Oftentimes, yes, we have networks, we have cronies, and then decisions will take and people will go behind the scenes and ensure that, oh, that's my boy, that's my girl, that's my this, and we don't get to implement these things. And the impact on how government sees the goings on in the academy, and therefore would want to exert some kind of control on that. So as our responsibility to government or to the person who is paying the piper, yes, let's make sure that we do that which is required of us in the right way. And going back to touch base with what Dr. Achuri said, how credible, how reliable, how competent are we in the execution of our duties? Do we recruit people because they are cronies or they are family members, or we recruit people based on competence? Okay, so if we recruit people willy-nilly, that definitely would have some impact on how we deal and deliver. And that would give government the cause to want to say, hey, guys, you are not doing right. I mean, output is not matching what is going inside, and therefore we need to rein you in. So if we sit up and follow the existing regulations, statutes, and acts, and make sure that if it's got to be, let it be. That way, I think everybody will be okay.
Great. I'm very happy about this. You are the most important people in this hall. Please contribute to the discussion. Any questions? Any comments? Young people? Yes, I see a hand at the back. Would somebody help us with the mic? Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having this important conversation on academic freedom. When I was here as a student some 16 years ago, I used to attack the university for being a very oppressive system, and generally the entire education system. I mean, take for instance the issue of remarking. How many students can have the courage to demand that their exam script be remarked in this university today? Look at what is happening at the law school at Makola, where students in the 21st century about to enhance their knowledge on law are forced to do an undertaking that they would not challenge their inadmission to, how do you call it, the law school. How does that impact on academic freedom? The other point is to ask whether lecturers can say anything at the lecture theater, and would that constitute academic freedom, and whether students have a right to reject whatever. And I'll give you one example. I remember in those days, there was this political science lecturer that would come to the lecture theater and be saying all manner of things that is unacademic not factual. And at the time, we were about 600 students, political science. I mean, you can imagine some hovering behind the windows and just to catch a glimpse of what the lecturer is saying. And then this lecturer went like, he has 2 dogs in his house. One is called Trotsky, and the other is called Kwame Nkrumah. That was just to show his level of disrespect for those individuals. And then went on to parrot to us a document that suggested that Kwame Nkrumah was incoherent and was insisting that that was the fact, that Kwame Nkrumah was incoherent, that every time that he came across his audience, they left more disappointed than they came. So out of nowhere, I shot my hands up and then challenged him that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up to the total liberation of the African continent. And then I asked the whole class, is this incoherent or not? And they all shouted, yeah, it is coherent. That was my end at the political science department. Since then, all the grades, and I was lucky to have combined political science with history. But you would see from my transcript, since then, all my grades from the political science department was nothing to write home about. Most of my good grades actually came from history. So thank you very much once again for the opportunity, and I'm grateful.
Thank you for that comment. I'll take it as a comment, and it's wonderful to have you back, to participate in this kind of discussion. Would you please introduce yourself? I forgot that. Introduce yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdul Karim Ibrahim. I am a graduate student at the Institute of African Studies. I just thought that, is this also not, and I see a lot of students here, and that's why I want to make that point. Is this, Prof, is this also not too abstract an engagement or conversation? Because I noticed that that is often the biggest critique that the rest of us, and I should also add that I'm a journalist, so I like to think that wanting to train to do the kind of work that you are doing, I can serve as a proper bridge between the masses out there and those in the university here doing the work that you are doing. And I wonder that where, for instance, are the examples? And why are we not naming and shaming, if that's the most appropriate thing to say here? Because look at very recent conversations around the IMF, Ghana going back there and all of that. And Dr. Achiuwe talks about coloniality, among other things. I don't see any part of the discourse that critiques those institutions in the way that they are. And so we get back to the very basic analysis of, and the economics department for me are the most guilty. I mean, the people in there, and they are very useful to national conversations on big platforms and all of that, but we don't get that. Might we be able to get, say, the likes of Professor Okyerefo, Professor Prof, among many others like that, begin to critique their own colleagues in that way? That is, if they agree with the point that I am making. And again, what Ernesto Yeboah mentioned just briefly about the law school and all of that. I see Professor Epegetu, I don't know, I think is stepped out or something. But we also know that the dean of the University of Ghana Law School is part of a collective of deans who are part of the General Legal Council that has become perhaps the most oppressive institution in this country. And young people are not able to speak up because they know very well that the repercussions will be so dire and their entire dream is on the line. Who is going to come up and speak? Much in the same way as we saw a collective of academics come out there on the anti-gay bill, and I'm very happy and excited about the work that they have done there. But could we see more, and could we see a lot more critique, very direct critique that says that this is not acceptable, so that it is not left to the rest of us who perhaps are seen as not knowing anything and sitting on radio and just talking because you go school enough to know the research and the PhD and everything that academics know. Who's going to do that on behalf of the rest of us? Thank you.
Are you going to respond to that? Before you respond, I'll take one point, and then if anybody wants to make a quick comment.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you for your very enlightening presentations. I have a question for Dr. Aturi. It's about the culture of academic titles here in Ghana, and he made a comparison with Oxford. Now, I want to ask if that is a colonial phenomenon or it's a cultural phenomenon. Thank you very much.
Hi, Caesar.
Yeah.
And,
yes.
and you can speak to this comment also. You wanted to say something about what Sam said earlier?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start off with the comment about what Sam said earlier when he used the metaphor of who pays the piper. Because this is a metaphor that is commonly employed when we begin to discuss relationships between the executive arm of government and the civil service in general, and in particular, the university. You know, in a republic, sovereignty ultimately lies with the people. Therefore, just as we working in the public universities are civil servants, so is the minister of education and even the president of the country. The executive exists to actually administer. So it is not government, strictly speaking, that is paying us. Who puts the money into the public universities are the people of Ghana through their taxes, their contributions, and their activities. And so let us keep that in mind. The way we deal with government and the government institutions should not always be seen almost as an employee-employer relationship, strictly like it would happen in a private enterprise. We are all involved in the same endeavor, which is to contribute to this country. So the executive is there to respond to the needs of the people, and we are here to contribute our part. And therefore, that in itself should limit the idea that, well, a government has employed us and therefore can dictate to us what is to be done. The government they're simply administrators. And I think, just putting that in perspective should make things clear that there are limits to the sort of, encroachment of power that can take place between the institutions. Now, the question that was directed to me about academic titles being a question of culture and then a question of, coloniality. There is a bit of both. But this gives me an occasion to talk about something that I think is important in our discussions. You see, we often just invoke this whole myth of culture, and we sometimes do not even allow things that are cultural to be discussed. It's true that, yes, within our African cultures, we do have a tradition of respect for senior people, for elders, and all that. That is part of our culture. But that culture functions on the assumption that the senior people and the elders are worthy of the respect that we give to them. And there are duties that they also have to exercise. So that is the value that we're trying to uphold. Otherwise, sometimes we say, well, this is our culture and this is the way it ought to be done. And this brings me back to something that I said in my presentation. There are many things that are cultural that we have abandoned in the past, and we don't do anymore. In the past, there were cultural practices of child marriages. There were cultural practices, even among some ethnic groups, of female genital mutilation. Why have we abandoned them? So, culture is not something that is static so that you just invoke when it is comfortable. And this is something that is very interesting because in our African Ghanaian context, you see, we have three different levels that are always operating. On the one hand, we have like the colonial model. On the other hand, we have, let's say, the religion-imported values of Christianity and Islam. And then on the third, the third level, we also have our traditional, values and ways of, doing things. And unfortunately, sometimes what we actually do is that we pick and choose the values from these cultures that are most comfortable for us, for our personal interests. And this is not right. That's a form of cultural relativism or what we call ethical egoism. And this needs to be challenged. So yes, it's true that, there is a bit of culture in the titles, but this brings us back to the question of how we create distance. That's the point that I'm trying to make. It's not just using titles, but it's the fact that we try to create distance so that we cannot be challenged. If you are Mr. and I'm Doctor and Mike is Prof, that already sets us on a hierarchical space. But in the process of knowledge generation, look, students who are doing their PhD thesis, MPhil thesis, can actually discover things that we as seniors, lecturers do not know, and we can learn from them. But if we keep insisting on putting all these distances, that's how we gag people and we stifle the conversation. So I'm not just fixed on the titles, but I'm fixed on how those titles begin to, continue to consolidate hierarchies that ensure that people cannot express themselves freely. And I think that is the point.
And the funniest part of it is that in this country today, people can assign titles to themselves. And all of us sort of seem to accept that process and apply the titles to them. Do you see that in our space? And that's problematic.
Yeah, and Mike, sorry, if I may come in, you see, there's this part of the big man culture. And it's also, and there are gender consequences of this whole big man culture thing. You have to be a big man. Why? And just to add another example, I shared apartments with a retired Supreme Court judge of the United Kingdom who was living next to me in my apartment here in the UK, in Oxford. We took the bus every morning to our offices. I would come down for breakfast, we share the kitchen, he would be making toast, I will also have the toast. This is a judge that our Supreme Court judges actually quote when they are making statements. Yet our Supreme Court judges need a V8, a bodyguard, and I don't know what else.
All right. So the entire space has to be decolonized, right? And deculturalized of cultural relativity. There's a comment here from Dennis Canterbury. Quite an eye-opening discussion on the public university bill. Now, concerning the notion of supervised independence, do our cultural values and norms imply some forms of supervised independence, as our behaviors are constrained by what the culture prescribed? Well, it's quite part of what Caesar is saying. Yeah. I support your position on the PUB. Don't get me wrong, Dennis Canterbury. So that's a comment. You're going to talk about it.
Yes. I think this feeds into what Dr. Aturi said about culture. Supervised independence and our culture. Culture is dynamic, just like he explained. As we journey on, what is it that we are picking from what we're seeing that is edifying, that is going to move us to the next level that is acceptable and appreciable to the community? It's just not picking things willy-nilly, but we should have that critical purview on issues, on matters and happenings that we come into contact with. That way, we are managing our affairs, we are managing our lives in a very organized and supervised way, in the same way as we are having some degree of independence. So it's just about getting the right balance and making sure that whatever it is that we're doing is not hurtful to the common good.
Right. Concerning his point about people like you, commenting on what is happening within our social space, I know you do quite a bit of that. Do you want to speak to this point?
Yes, both to Abdul Karim and gentleman in the back. I'm sorry that I saw Professor Akila Pasoya leave. I guess with the privilege of age, you see things in a longer span. I don't want to give away my age, but it's fair enough. I went to the KNUST. I joined KNUST in January 1989 as a fresh woman. So from then till now, I've been in higher education as a student and as a faculty over a long period of time. And so I would dare to say that Abdul Karim, what you are looking for has been happening, right? You are seeing it in a particular slice in time. And as a sociologist with some informal study of history, societies, movements, they ebb and flow. We look at them at particular points when they are low and we feel desperate, frustrated, angry, and so on. This is not to marginalize anything that you're saying. It is true. There should definitely be more commentary from us. There should be more public intellectualism from us. There should be more critique of each other. I assure you that a lot of that goes on. Some of it goes on in publication spaces and in conferences and so on. So it may not flow into the public arena. Sadly, also because of social media, some of that commentary has become very fierce, unkind, intolerant, and not necessarily always productive. It's like who can shout the loudest to show that they know the most and that the other person is wrong. That doesn't help us, but I agree with you that there should be more of it. And one of my sadness is that I do not see more intellectual public engagement from our students. It's partly our fault for not having sufficiently trained our students to do that. Of course, when I went to first year, we were 18 architecture students. Now they are in the hundreds. I could have relationships with my professors. And so to Cesar's comment about the titles, yeah, the titles do create some hierarchies. I have to confess, I'm not sure that I will feel comfortable if my students start calling me Akusua until I invite that kind of level of intimacy. But I went through a system where there were titles and there was fluidity between us lecturers. We could go to their homes for dinner. They would have intellectual conversations with us. And this was a function of the kind of space that we were having. It was a historical moment. So we need to do more of that, but our students also need to engage with that. One example, when I was on University of Ghana Council, was a moment when there was a proposal to have Commonwealth Hall become a co-ed and graduate. Of course, the resistance from Commonwealth Hall was fierce. I was sitting in my office at the Institute of African Studies. I may have been director then, I cannot remember. I think I was, because I had a nice big office. A student came in, student from Commonwealth Hall. He wanted to engage with me on the subject. So we sat and talked about it. I told him why I thought that it would be a good idea to have a co-educational hall with graduate students predominantly. He told me the reasons why he disagreed with me. I was not convinced by his arguments. But I'm making this example to show that this was not my student. I didn't know him from Eve. He came from his hall, walked to the Institute of African Studies, decided that he could have a conversation with me. And we had not had any prior engagement. This was not in the era of social media for him to even think, oh, I've seen Prof on TV, maybe she's a nice lady, whatever. He didn't have any idea of who I was. But somehow he decided that he should come and talk to me. There should be more of such. I'm throwing the ball back also. There should be more of such efforts from students to also engage. Look, students are exhausted. Believe you me, faculty, we are also very exhausted. We are exhausted. We don't have a break. From morning to night, grading, writing new courses, you have to publish, you do research grants and so on. And the younger faculty are stretched. Go and have a conversation with your lecturer about something. I want to, that the other thing that you, of course, if you have a lecturer who is as disrespectful as the one described in political science, I don't think you want to waste your time. You're probably not going anywhere with it. But there are lecturers that you can engage with. And finally, to speak to that issue of calling out, naming and shaming, we have an ombudsman system in the University of Ghana. I'm sure many of the students do not know. This is not a perfect system, but this is a system that is external to the existing mechanisms. So I have been graded. I think I've been unfairly graded. I have asked for a remark. I was not happy. I have been able to catalog some evidence to show I've been unfairly treated. Take it to the ombudsman and ask, how do we call it? The appeals system. It is for staff, it is for faculty, it is for students. You have to test it. Not everybody, I know people who have used it successfully, faculty, I know faculty who have used it unsuccessfully. Unsuccessfully in the sense that they didn't get the results that they had hoped for. But we have to test these systems. We have to put our money where our mouth is. To borrow a cliche, be the change you want to see. Always waiting for somebody else to do, of course, some of us have more power. And so therefore we have less to lose by opening our mouths, and we should. But if you do not learn to speak up when you are 18, 20, 22, 24 in this hierarchical Ghana, believe me, you are not going to start doing it when you're 45. You will not. Anybody who is an advocate, an activist, has been doing it from an early age. So this is my challenge to all of us, that the corner you are in, where you can do, find, of course, some things are difficult. Find people who will be your advocates. Be savvy about it. Find somebody to be your advocate. After all, in our traditional system, when there's something in the family, you go and look for a trusted uncle to go and speak to the Obusuapeni on your behalf, right? You don't necessarily go yourself. The person you are taking, you know that the Obusuapeni will listen to him or her. You have a conversation with that person and you strategize before you go, and it works. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I think we should throw it back to them. We are here because of you. This is the academic freedom we're talking about. And Abdul Karim, is that the name again? Yeah. These are the kind of spaces we organize also, because they are listening. Everybody is listening. The people on this campus are listening. Those outside are listening. We're having this kind of engagement. It's important. Our universities, because of the workload, perhaps are having less and less of this, which is why I'm so happy to see many of you. And so this is a kind of space also that contributes to what you're saying. Any other person? Any comment?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Good evening.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Edem Damanka. I completed about 10 years ago to 11 years ago for my undergrad. I came back to do my MPhil. And I'm happy we're having this conversation, especially on academic freedom and the African University contemporary issues. I know we're in the University of Ghana, and this is my alma mater, so I'm proud. And I think the values, when we were here, and we hear it in our anthem, proceeding truth and integrity, had been what is supposed to govern the culture in which we are raised. I watch the videos and I listen to the issues of government interference in university education, and I'm asking myself, most of the people who are in government today probably were raised in the university. What was the value that shaped them or us when we were being put out there? I want to take it 2 levels. When you come to school, and it's still happening among our fellow students now, is the internal politics, the student politics and the student administration. Sometimes the thinking is that it's we against the student administration. So there's a saying that you can have your say, but eventually we're going to have our way. So just imagine a student body that probably were raised in a community that felt intimidated. Psychologically, some of them are now in place of positions in politics and government. And I'm just thinking, couldn't it be that some of them are thinking this is their time for revenge? Now it's our time to try to suppress the institution in which we were raised. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying we need to reflect on the culture within which we are raising the student. My senior happened, I think that's Ernesto, talking about the interaction even within the lecture hall. Are we allowed to speak truth to power? Are we allowed to challenge the facts out there? And Prof Adomako talked about pastoral care for students. And I think that really played out very well for me, especially when I was here, I had lecturers I could look up to as mentors. So those were the people that, actually challenged you to think with them. These are people who engage you in research work because they want to hear what you had to share. Final submission is, I don't know what is happening presently at the undergrad level, but I know at the graduate level, there's always thorough, when you have to defend your thesis, there's always that thorough questioning and investigation. Among you, the faculty and your student colleagues, where they share different perspectives, they question your work and challenge your thinking. I don't know if that is done at the undergrad level. I know at the undergrad level, you have the options to even choose to do thesis or not to do. And those who actually do, I don't think that they go through that whole thorough process of critical thinking and putting out their work there. And majority of the undergrad are the people who go out to the world out there. Few are the ones who go into the graduate school to go through that whole process of critical thinking. So I think that's one of the things the university community think about. How can we make sure, even at the undergraduate level, we are engaging them in rigorous thinking, critical thinking, in terms of the work they put out there in research? Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. That's a very good point, because I tell my students, when you come to the university, you read for a degree. You're not here to study. You read for a degree. You're here to be guided. The professors guide you to make your mind more and more creative. They open avenues for you, point you in directions. You read for a degree. You engage in conversation. You have that creative thought you're talking about. And that can only happen when we continually review our courses. We are supposed to be doing that, review our courses, have the conversation in our departments about what to include, the changes we need to make to meet the times, the changes that are taking place in the world, in conversation with our own societies, our cultures, etc. Because as we heard, culture is not static. So yes, those processes are in place. The question is how well we use them. So thank you for that reminder. Given the fact that we have not had a break, we're going to close at 8 o'clock. Let me, in conversation with you, say we will close in the next 10 minutes, right? So, any point? Any question? 2 of them, introduce yourselves, and we can wrap up.
Prof, you have to direct me here because it will be difficult to choose who should speak, but yeah, I'm here with someone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Samuel Kabute. I am a national service personnel at psychology department. I did my undergraduate here in BSc psychology. I just have a suggestion because one of the biggest challenges UG students face is that they don't know where to go to when they are stranded with a particular information they are looking for. So, for example, your grade is not coming, you have been chasing it, you are following, you are still not getting it. 1 year is gone, 2 years is gone, you are still not seeing it. We don't know who to go to. You have a supervisor, for example, and the supervisor is unresponsive. You don't know who to go to. You know, you have a resit, you don't know whether you'll be able to graduate or not. You don't know who to ask. So I just want to suggest that the university should have, if it's like an information hub where anything bothering the student, whatever it is, they can just call, place the complaint or place the inquiry, and they'll be given the right information as to who to go to for what information, who to go to make any complaint and issues around that. Thank you.
Well, that's a good
Moderator,
point.
can I throw a challenge to that student?
Good, yes.
The young man who just spoke, I'm throwing a challenge to you. Can you develop a list of frequently asked questions for students? I promise to see what I can do with it and put it somewhere that people can go to and click and get the answers to some of these commonly asked questions. Would that be a start? Okay.
How about our orientation? When students come, they're supposed to have an orientation. Imagine somebody coming for the first time, level 100. Walking around this campus itself can be confusing. By the way, we have one of the best campuses in the world, right? It's a beautiful university. And there are many students here who do not discover it by the time they are graduating. All these beautiful places. So, there is supposed to be an orientation. Do you attend that? Your department, every student has somebody who is in charge of his or her level as an advisor. Do you speak to such a person? Right. The final point.
Okay, thank you so much for that orientation. I feel very privileged to have been here. I'm a graduate student from the Institute of African Studies, and having both my undergrad lecturer, Dr. Bernard, and also my professor, Professor Adomakwampofo here, I feel this is a very great opportunity for us to interact. So growing up as a child, when I wanted to say something, there was nothing that could stop me, unless I didn't want to say it. And it didn't matter who it had to be said to, I would just say it. But having an undergrad here, I remember in undergrad I had an issue with my grades. And me with anger, so angry, I just entered into a lecturer's office and I had to tell her what I had to tell her. Right. What am I saying? Mami touched on something that I think she carried what people in undergrad or people in the classrooms are going through, and I think we could relate with her. Professor Domak also spoke about pastoral care and all that. What am I saying? As a student, yes, we have the freedom of speaking, this is academic freedom and all that. But if you think you have any issue with any lecturer, Professor Adomako gave an example of a student who just walked into her office and had an interaction with her. Why don't you go there and sit and have an interaction rather than thinking that you have the power of speech so you could speak anyway and anyhow? That is what I'm saying. As a student, you may have an issue. Prof also raised an issue about orientations. Is there an academic advisor? Is there someone you think you can talk to? Is there any lecturer you think is not boisterous or proud or will not listen to students' issues? Identify that person and go to that person. You don't really need to go to the vice chancellor or write a long essay or write a long letter. Just identify people who you think when you speak, they will listen to you, and I'm sure your issues will be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you for coming here. I'd like to thank you for being panelists. I'd like to thank the Institute of African Studies for initiating this conversation. I have a sense that in this room, we are engaging with one another on these critical issues that border on our being here to create ideas in an institution that governs the lives of many, many, many people. The point is never to give up. If you've never walked into somebody's office to talk to that person, maybe you may see the person at the car park and think, this person, I can't engage him or her in conversation. But you may be wrong. This space is meant for each and every one. And as you heard Caesar, the only reason we are here is because the taxpayer has made it possible. And by the way, some of us are also taxpayers. Some of our farmers said they wanted a university for their children and contributed to building Legon. It is a national asset. It is an international asset. It is a place where each and everyone should feel safe. Of course, with respect for each other. This conversation is going to build on, I've been assured by the Institute of African Studies. We have 2 more coming up. I guess they are going to be even much more interesting. And so I invite you already to them. Thank you for coming. And let's give a round of applause to our panelists. May I now invite the MC to close the occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, and thank you very much to everyone that's here. I really don't have anything to say but to welcome you all to continue this conversation with the Institute of African Studies over the next 2 weeks. The next session will be on Friday of next week, the 19th at 5 p.m. in this room and also online. And then the final session will be Thursday, the 25th of August. But this isn't after the 25th of August. We'll continue to have conversations about academic freedom and about the relationship between students and faculty and the administration and the community. So on behalf of the panelists, the Institute of African Studies, the convener, we thank you very much and we hope to see you next week. Have a good evening.
And those online, we've consistently had 30 people. None of them left. Give them a hand of applause. So thank you. Have a great evening. Thank you.